My best friend and I, for the sake of winning the favor of a genius surgeon, had our friendship capsized. In my first life, I got my wish and married him, becoming the director's wife. He said I was skilled and ingenious, the best embalmer he had ever seen. But to complete his experiment, he used me as a living specimen, my hands cut open 72 times. The last time I bled to death, and before my consciousness dissipated, I heard his cold sigh. I have to admit your technique is impeccable, but unfortunately you're not as beautiful as her. In my second life, I yielded to my best friend. She was a professional bone collector, not only beautiful but also possessed an amazing skill in bone articulation. I thought she would live happily ever after. But 5 years later, I received an anonymous package containing perfectly separated bones and my best friend's intact skin. Inscribed on it was a line. Though the bone structure is beautiful, she unfortunately talked too much. Only she is truly perfect. When I opened my eyes again, we were back at the year-end team-building event that decided our fates, watching the man hand over the engagement ring with deep affection. My best friend and I exchanged a look, silently tightening our grips on the suture needles and bone-carving knives. If he had someone he liked, why did he have to torment us? The surrounding air seemed to freeze. All I could see was that man, Julian, one hand in his pocket, the other holding up a large diamond ring, standing between Sienna and me, enjoying the pleasure of choosing a concubine. Marry him. Marry him. My colleagues were screaming and cheering. The atmosphere was extremely enthusiastic. But I only felt cold all over. I subconsciously looked at Sienna beside me. Her face was breathtakingly beautiful under the lights, but now it was as pale as paper. Our eyes met in the air. There was no more jealousy, no more hostile rivalry, only a chill that penetrated to the bone, and a tacit understanding that was almost telepathic. Julian was very satisfied with our shocked, speechless expressions. The smile on his lips deepened, with a touch of doting and difficult entanglement. He spoke slowly, his voice as gentle as dripping water. Adeline, Sienna, it's difficult for me to choose. Which of you loves me more? The cheers around us grew louder, and everyone craned their necks, waiting to see us tear each other apart for him. However, I simply laughed coldly and stepped back. Everyone was stunned. Sienna's reaction was even more extreme. She frowned, raised her hand, and waved it in front of her nose in disgust. The smile on Julian's face froze. Director Julian, I'm allergic to your scalpel. I don't want to marry. Sienna immediately followed up, her voice clear and loud. I'm allergic to scum. I don't want to marry even more. The entire room was silent. Julian's refined and handsome face instantly turned liver-colored. He, a favored son of heaven, a genius surgeon, the youngest director of the private hospital, had never been rejected by anyone before. Adeline, Sienna, don't forget who was the one who made an exception and recruited you into the hospital. I was too lazy to waste any more words with him, and pulled Sienna's hand to leave. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of a weak figure in the corner. It was his assistant, Ilara. She was looking at us, with jealousy in her eyes that she couldn't hide in time. Sienna and I exchanged a look, understanding everything. We thought publicly rejecting his proposal would give Julian, that narcissistic pervert, a few days of peace. But the very next day, I received a call from him. Adeline, last night was my fault. I shouldn't have embarrassed you like that in that setting. I have a new project in my private lab. It's a brand new biological suturing technique. I think you and Sienna would be interested. Private lab. In the previous 2 lives, we didn't know he had such a place. Sienna and I exchanged glances over the phone. We had to see it, to know how far his plan had progressed in this life. Of course, Director Julian. We'd be honored. As soon as we entered, the strong smell of formaldehyde hit us, making us want to vomit. Julian put on white gloves and took a rabbit sewn into a grotesque shape from a glass tank. Adeline, look, this is my new work, perfectly sutured. But I always feel like it's missing something. His eyes stared at my hands with fanaticism. Your hands are the hands of God, born to do this. My stomach churned, but I put on a fascinated expression. Director Julian, you're amazing. He then turned to look at Sienna, his gaze sweeping from her face to her collarbone. Sienna's bone structure is the most perfect I've ever seen, Especially this collarbone. It's truly a masterpiece of God. Sienna's fingernails almost dug into her palms, but she still gave a bashful smile. Julian walked towards me with deep affection. Adeline, I know you have trauma from surgery, but your talent shouldn't be buried. Follow me, and I can make you the greatest artist. His hand was about to touch my shoulder, but I suddenly moved aside. I accidentally bumped into his easel, and the ink on the table fell over, splashing everywhere. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Director Julian, let me clean it up for you. I apologized frantically, taking the opportunity to grab tissues from the table to wipe it. Just as he turned to get a rag, I saw it. The painting on the easel was an unfinished nude sketch. The woman in the painting had no face, but the hands, slender and delicate, were mine. That collarbone with its beautiful lines was Sienna's. But the overall contour and shape of the body were disproportionately thin, just like his assistant, Elara, who always followed him. My heartbeat almost stopped. From the gap in the drawer, the corner of a medical record was visible. Name Elara. Diagnosis: congenital myasthenia, progressive multi-organ failure. He wasn't choosing concubines. He was choosing parts. He wanted my hands, Sienna's bones, to piece together a perfect Elara. Adeline. Behind me, Julian's voice suddenly turned sinister. What are you looking at? My whole body stiffened, cold sweat instantly soaking my back. A fruit knife was suddenly plunged into the apple on the table, the handle still buzzing. Of course, I'm looking at your apple. She pointed to the spot where the knife had stabbed, where there was a small rotten area. Director Julian is so rich. He doesn't need to be so frugal, right? The apple's rotten. You should have thrown it away a long time ago, shouldn't you? Hearing this, Julian put on his professional fake smile again. Sienna and I exchanged a glance, using the excuse of feeling unwell, and quickly left that den of demons. Back in our shared apartment, the moment the door closed, Sienna collapsed onto me. Adeline. Her voice trembled, and she hugged me tightly. Can you believe it? I've been reborn. I hugged her back tightly, patting her trembling back. I believe you. The fear and pain suppressed for too long completely erupted. Sienna buried her face in my shoulder and cried loudly. Julian, that devil, he peeled off my skin completely. Like a piece of clothing. My bones were taken apart one by one, washed clean, and pieced together as a specimen. Adeline, it hurts so much. It really hurts. I listened to her cries, my heart aching so much I could barely breathe. I raised my own wrist and rubbed the smooth skin. In the first life, he had cut it 72 times. Both of us were experimental subjects under Julian's perverted hands. We cried for who knows how long, until both of us ran out of tears. Sienna finally lifted her head from my arms, her eyes red and swollen, but her gaze had changed. She wiped away her tears and walked into the room without a word. When she came out again, she had a long, rectangular leather tool bag in her hand. She slowly unfolded it in front of me. Inside was a complete set of knives, large and small, gleaming coldly. Her professional tools, bone-picking knives. I also stood up, returned to my room, and took out my suture needle kit. Needles of various lengths and thicknesses reflected a cold light under the lamp. We looked at the tools in each other's hands. What are his weaknesses? I asked, my voice icy. Reputation. He's an extremely narcissistic perfectionist who can't tolerate any blemishes on his image. And Elara, I added. A plan slowly formed in our minds. Just then, the doorbell rang. Sienna and I exchanged glances, both full of vigilance. Opening the door, two handsome men stood outside, looking exactly alike. Miss Adeline, Miss Sienna, we are Jasper and Griffin from the Lou Corporation. One of the men, who seemed more composed, spoke. We have been investigating Julian's illegal drug experiments. Perhaps we can cooperate. The Lou brothers, heirs to a world-class medical device group, and also Julian's business rivals. Heaven is truly helping me. We invited them inside, and the four of us immediately clicked. We provide inside information, and they provide power and resource support. After seeing off the Lou brothers, my phone vibrated. It was a message from Julian. 3 days from now, Cloud Top Hotel, my engagement banquet. You must choose one person to come. Otherwise, I will use Julian's power to make sure you can't survive in the entire industry. I looked at Sienna, and she was also looking at me, a cold smile curling at the corners of her lips. I replied with 2 words. Okay. Then I added, a surprise for you in 3 days. 3 days later, Cloud Top Hotel. Julian's engagement banquet was extremely grand, with almost all the celebrities and media in the city invited. When Sienna and I arrived, we immediately became the focus of the entire event. Everyone thought that one of us would be today's bride, but we disappointed them. I was wearing my work uniform. Sienna was wearing a cool leather jacket and leather pants. The 2 of us looked like we were here to make trouble, not to attend a wedding. Julian's face darkened when he saw us, but he quickly recovered his arrogant, confident demeanor. He walked up to us, lowered his voice, and commanded in an unquestionable tone. Haven't you made enough trouble? The dresses are ready backstage. Go and change. I smiled. Director Julian, we're quite comfortable in these. Sienna crossed her arms and looked at him. Yeah, in case there's any heavy lifting to do later, it's convenient. Julian's patience was clearly exhausted, and he turned and walked away, ignoring us. In the backstage dressing room, Elara was busying herself as an assistant. When she saw us, her eyes were filled with jealousy and resentment, but she could only squeeze out a humble smile. Miss Adeline, Miss Sienna, Director Julian asked me to help you change into your dresses. I pulled Sienna and sat her down on the sofa in front of her. No ruse. It's not like Director Julian cares who the bride is today, right? Sienna crossed her legs and nonchalantly filed her nails. Yeah, we're just useful tools and skeletons in his eyes. Do you think he'll like you more? That sentence hit Elara's sore spot accurately. Her face instantly turned pale, and her lips trembled. I leaned closer to her, and said in a voice only the 3 of us could hear. I overheard Director Julian on the phone outside just now. He said you're just a defective product about to be scrapped. Only perfect, healthy bodies like ours are worthy of him. No. That's not what he said. Elara's emotions completely broke down. Jealousy, resentment, and the fear of being treated as junk made her lose her mind. Sienna stood up, walked to the spare pure white wedding dress, and sighed with feigned regret. It's a shame, such a beautiful wedding dress. It would be so great if you were the bride today. Director Julian would be so surprised. Surprised? Elara muttered to herself, her eyes beginning to turn frantic. I looked at her and coaxed her. Yes, he loves you so much, he sacrificed so much for you. Why can't you be brave and fight for yourself for once? Put it on, stand in front of him, and tell everyone that you are his one true love. Under our continuous guidance, the last vestiges of reason in Elara's eyes were replaced by madness. She stared intently at the wedding dress. Yes. I am his true love. I am. She pushed us away and rushed over, frantically putting on the wedding dress. We even thoughtfully handed her a lace mask. Wear this, Director Julian likes the mystery. The ceremony began. To create a so-called romantic atmosphere, Julian deliberately dimmed the lights on the scene to be extremely dim. He stood in the center of the stage, looking at the entrance with anticipation. As Elara, wearing a wedding dress and mask, slowly walked towards him, the smile on his face grew more and more triumphant. He thought Sienna was walking towards him because the size of the wedding dress fit Sienna's figure better. He took Elara's hand, his brow furrowing almost imperceptibly. The feel was wrong. The touch of the bones was too frail. But he immediately comforted himself. Maybe it's my hand? To maintain his deeply loving and perfect persona, and also for that pathetic bit of face, he did not remove the veil on the spot. He recited the vows affectionately and exchanged rings. Sienna and I sat in the audience, coldly watching this farcical farce. After the master of ceremonies shouted, "The groom may now kiss his bride," he lifted a corner of the veil and kissed her. The ceremony was complete. At that moment, I stood up. Clap, clap, clap. The crisp applause was particularly loud in the quiet hall. All the lights in the entire venue suddenly came on. I smiled and said loudly, "Congratulations, Director Julian. You got your wish and married the love of your life." Julian abruptly raised his head, the blinding lights making him squint. When he finally made out that the bride in his arms was Elara, His face instantly went from red to white, then from white to green, and finally turned ashen gray. Julian wanted to explode. But he couldn't. Dozens of media outlets had their cameras pointed at him. He could only force a smile that was uglier than crying, embrace the shivering Alara tightly, and force himself to act out this deeply affectionate scene. "Alara, you're so mischievous, giving me such a big surprise." His voice was squeezed out from between his teeth, but his eyes looked like they wanted to kill. Backstage, his carefully constructed civilized mask shattered completely. He backhanded Alara by the neck, pinning her hard against the wall. "Speak. Why you? Who told you to do this?" Alara was scared out of her wits, only able to make gasping sounds. Just then, the door was pushed open. Sienna and I walked in, followed by the Liu brothers and their legal team. When Julian saw us, he suddenly released Alara, a hint of panic flashing in his eyes, but he quickly replaced it with an expression of anger at being betrayed. "It's you. You plotted to frame me," he accused, turning the tables. I took out a voice recorder from my pocket and pressed play. The clear sound of Alara's sobbing confession filled the air, admitting that she had been driven mad by jealousy and willingly put on the wedding dress. "No. It's not me." Alara collapsed on the ground, incoherent. Sienna, unhurriedly, took a stack of documents from her bag and threw them on the table. "Director Julian, is this the list of special medications you've been prescribing to Alara over the past 2 years? All experimental drugs not available on the market, and with dosages increasing each time." She smiled. "What do you think would happen if the hospital board and the Food and Drug Administration became interested in you using your personal assistant for drug trials?" Julian's face paled even further as he looked at the list, but he still maintained his final arrogance, attempting to suppress us with his professional knowledge. "What do you understand? This is a special treatment plan for Alara's condition, completely in accordance with medical ethics." As soon as he finished speaking, Griffin pushed another document in front of him. "Is that so? This is the analysis report of the Drug Components Commission from the world's most authoritative drug testing center. The report indicates that these drugs not only cannot treat muscle weakness, but will accelerate organ failure. The only purpose is to maintain vital signs until a suitable donor can be found." Griffin's words were like a heavy hammer, completely shattering Julian's final defense. He looked at the report, then at the Liu brothers, finally realizing that his financial chain and future were in the hands of others. He was afraid. He looked at Sienna and me, his eyes changing again and again, finally managing to force out a flattering smile. He tried to make a final appeal. "Adeline, Sienna, I know you're angry. I admit, my marrying Alara was just a matter of expediency, to stabilize the media. The ones I love have always been you. It's your irreplaceable skills and talents." Hearing this, I almost laughed out loud. Sienna even snorted in disdain without holding back. "Skills? You love our bones and skin, right?" These words completely tore off his last fig leaf. Jasper's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and raised an eyebrow. "Done. Guess what your assistant just told the media?" She said that in private. Director Julian often told her. Women are nothing more than perfect containers and the best materials. Julian trembled all over and collapsed into the chair. His persona shattered in an instant. The hospital board immediately called, informing him that he was suspended from his duties immediately and subject to investigation. Julian hung up the phone, looking like a dead, gray statue. He slowly raised his head and looked at Sienna and me. The desire and possession in his eyes had vanished completely, replaced by undisguised, icy, bone-chilling murderous intent. Julian was suspended from his position, and all his research projects were halted. This was fatal for Alara. Her body, sustained by those special drugs, was already at its limit. Once the drugs stopped, her vital signs began to plummet drastically, and the hospital issued a critical condition notice. She needed immediate organ and bone marrow transplants. Julian completely lost it. He stayed by Alara's bedside, watching her deteriorate day by day, watching his most perfect semi-finished product, about to turn to nothing. The last vestiges of reason in his eyes burned out. Since legal means were impossible, he would resort to his most primal and proficient method. Direct plunder. Sienna and I had anticipated that he would be desperate, and we were cautious everywhere, with bodyguards arranged by the Liu brothers even during our commutes. But we still underestimated the determination of a madman. That day after work, we were walking in the underground parking garage. Suddenly, a pungent, sweet aroma erupted from the vents. It was a potent chemical anesthetic. Sienna and I only had time to exchange a glance before we lost consciousness. When I woke up again, the blinding surgical lights made it difficult to open my eyes. The heavy smell of blood mixed with disinfectant filled my nostrils. I was tightly strapped to a cold surgical table, the feeling of metal restraints on my wrists and ankles. I turned my head and saw Sienna lying on another surgical table next to me, in the same situation. And between us, there was a third person. It was the dying Alara, covered in tubes, with the faint beeping of the machines. A man wearing a blood-stained white coat, with his back to us, was selecting something from the instrument tray. Scalpels, bone saws, carving knives. All gleaming coldly. He turned around, it was Julian. His gold-rimmed glasses were gone, his hair was disheveled, his eyes were bloodshot, and his expression was manic and excited. "You're awake." He laughed, like a demon crawled out of hell. "Since you are unwilling to marry me willingly, then just contribute your bodies to my art." He walked to my side and picked up a sharp scalpel, the blade gently tracing my face, bringing a chilling sensation. Adeline's skin is smooth and delicate, the best material for the surface. He walked to Sienna and tapped her collarbone with his finger, making a crisp sound. Sienna's bones are perfect and flawless, the best material for the framework. With you, my Alara will become the most perfect work of art in the world. Just when I thought he was going to act on me first, the tip of the scalpel suddenly cut through the skin of my wrist. Excruciating pain surged, and blood gushed out instantly. He didn't want my face, he was just enjoying the pleasure of torturing us. Sienna was struggling desperately beside me, but the restraints were specially made and didn't budge. A sense of helplessness overwhelmed us like a tide. Suddenly, Julian let out an "oh dear" sound, and the hemostat in his hand fell to the ground. His hand was shaking. It was the long-term high tension and madness that had caused his nerves to become uncontrollable. A surgeon's hand actually shaking. This was an opportunity. However, before we could rejoice, we saw him take out a syringe from his pocket and unhesitatingly inject it into his arm. It was a potent stimulant. The drug took effect quickly, the bloodshot in his eyes became heavier, but his trembling hand steadied. Deeper fear gripped our hearts. He picked up a sharp boning knife again, and walked towards Sienna. "Let's start with the most beautiful bone." Sienna's face was as white as paper, but her eyes were unusually calm. Just as Julian leaned down, preparing to cut beneath her perfect collarbone, she looked at me and silently mouthed 2 words. "Now." The next second, a faint cracking sound was heard. Sienna, utilizing the bone picker's extreme knowledge of human bones, used an incredible amount of skill to forcefully dislocate the wrist joint of one of her bound hands. The intense pain made her groan, and her forehead was instantly covered in cold sweat. But she succeeded. One hand gained limited freedom. At the same time, I bit the tip of my tongue sharply. The intense pain kept me awake. I spat out a tiny cicada wing-thin blade hidden under my tongue. This was a tool that we morticians carried with us to deal with special situations. I used all my strength, twisting my body, and repeatedly cut the restraints on my wrists with the blade. Julian was completely unaware. He was too arrogant, too immersed in the ecstasy of the masterpiece he was about to complete. He raised the knife. The blade fell. At this critical moment, Sienna suddenly burst out. Her dislocated hand, at a strange angle, slammed hard into Julian's face. It was the sound of a nasal bone breaking. Julian let out a groan of pain and staggered back a few steps. His glasses were knocked off and shattered on the floor. Blood spurted from his nose, instantly blurring his vision. "Now's the time." The restraints on my wrist snapped. I broke free, rolled off the operating table, and tightly gripped the miniature scalpel in my hand. "Bitch." Julian wiped the blood from his face and rushed at me madly, still waving the boning knife in his hand. Advanced emotional manipulation. Stimulated by the drugs, his strength and speed were far beyond those of ordinary people, and we couldn't fight him head-on. Danger. I ducked under the knife he swung and rolled under another operating table. Sienna also took the opportunity to break free of her other hand, rolled off the operating table, and hit on the other side. We used the complex terrain of the operating room to circle around him. You can't escape. You're all mine. Like an enraged beast, he frantically waved the knife, slashing at everything around him. Sienna calmly watched him, like an experienced hunter observing every movement of her prey. She suddenly made a gesture to me. I immediately understood. I rushed out from one side to attract his attention. Julian, you think you're a genius? How can't you even catch two women? He was indeed provoked and turned to rush at me. Just as he turned, Sienna suddenly darted out from the other side. She didn't attack his vital points, but instead slammed her elbow hard into the outside of his knee. It was one of the most vulnerable joints in the human body. Julian let out a scream and lost his balance, dropping to one knee. Reversal. I didn't give him any chance to breathe. I appeared behind him like a ghost, the suture needle with its special black thread in my hand, as fast as lightning. The needle, precisely piercing the gap between his collarbones and scapulae on both sides, then yanked sharply. The taut thread tightened, restricting his upper body firmly to the edge of the cold operating table. This was the suture technique embalmers use to fix a corpse's posture. It was perfectly suited for use on him, a living person. Sienna, enduring the sharp pain, pushed her dislocated wrist back into place. She picked up her boning knife from the floor and walked step by step towards Julian, who was kneeling on the ground. She gently lifted his chin with the tip of the knife and smiled. Director Julian, didn't you always like perfect bones? How about I help you take them apart one by one, so you can have a good look yourself? Julian's eyes widened in horror. For the first time he felt the threat of death. No. You can't kill me. I'm a genius. Everything I've done is for the advancement of medicine. He was still roaring, still trying to find excuses for his perverted actions. Just then Alara, who had been ignored the whole time, seemed to be overwhelmed by the intense shock, and the heart monitor suddenly emitted a sharp, piercing alarm. Julian instinctively lost focus and glanced back. At that moment, I stood behind him looking at his face contorted in struggle, and said coldly, "Your medicine is murder. Our technique is salvation." The second before the Liu brothers burst through the door with the police. In his violent struggle, Julian's body lunged forward. His neck, precisely, collided with Sienna's boning knife, which she had slightly raised because of his distraction. Blood gushed out like a fountain. Julian didn't die instantly. The boning knife precisely severed his trachea and carotid artery. He fell to the ground like a fish out of water, making a wheezing, bellows-like sound in his throat, unable to utter a single word. He stared wide-eyed, watching me and Sienna standing above him, his eyes filled with terror and resentment. The police and the Liu brothers rushed in and quickly secured the scene. Medical personnel rushed to Julian, trying to provide first aid. I pushed through the crowd and slowly squatted down. I took out the finest suture needle from my toolkit and waved it in front of his eyes. I asked him in the gentlest voice, "Director Julian, do you need me to sew you up? Although my fees are quite high probably. Just a life." The fear in his eyes instantly magnified to the extreme, mixed with an intense desire for survival. He wanted to beg for mercy, to call for help, but could only let out meaningless roars. Sienna sneered, walked over, and kicked away his hand that was trying to reach me. "Don't bother." She looked down at him, as if looking at a pile of garbage. "This cut severed the main supply artery, and took away your most prized vocal cords. Even a god can't save you." Emotional roller coaster. He despaired. He struggled, using his last strength, to look in another direction. It was Alara. He looked at his most perfect semi-finished product, in this life, a glimmer of hope flickering in his eyes. However, what happened next plunged him into even greater despair. Alara, the woman he had always regarded as his spiritual sustenance and work of art, couldn't withstand the immense shock of witnessing this bloody and horrific scene, and her already fragile heart gave out. The EKG on the monitor turned into a straight line, emitting a long beep. She died. Died in front of him. His beloved perfect semi-finished product had left before him. For this ultimate perfectionist pervert, It was a spiritual torment more cruel than death itself. The light in his eyes was completely extinguished. He was carried onto a stretcher and sent to the hospital. But in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, he died due to excessive blood loss and complete mental collapse. According to the nurse in the ambulance, he stared fixedly at his hands before he died. Those hands, once hailed as hands of God, created countless medical miracles, and also committed countless heinous crimes. It was as if he saw countless wronged souls seeking his life from those hands. His eyes would not close in death. Regarding the aftermath, the Liu brothers used their connections to handle everything properly. We were acting in self-defense, and could even be said to have assisted the police in destroying an illegal human experimentation den. Julian's entire crimes, along with his shady experimental records, were all made public. His reputation was ruined. After his death, no one claimed his body, and it was eventually treated as an ordinary teaching specimen by the medical school. A genius of a generation met such an end, which is lamentable. But I just want to say one thing. Serves him right. A month later, all the storms settled. The private hospital run by Julian closed down due to the scandal, and was wholly acquired by the Liu Group for a complete reform. Sienna and I stood in the afternoon sunlight, warm and comfortable, as if separated from another lifetime. There was no longer the cold smell of formaldehyde, nor the cold touch of a scalpel. The Liu brothers walked towards us. The older brother, Griffin, with a calm personality, walked up to me and handed me an exquisite box. Upon opening it, it was a set of top-quality German customized embalming tools. From now on, only for the rest of the deceased, and never bow to evildoers. He looked at me, his eyes gentle and firm. I smiled and accepted this generous gift. The younger brother, Jasper, with a lively personality, was pestering Sienna shamelessly. "Sienna, can you help me look at my bone structure again? Look, my bones are so unique. Am I one in a million martial arts prodigy?" Sienna crossed her arms and sized him up, rolling her eyes. "I think you're asking for a bone picking." Even though she said that, Jasper seemed to have heard some great news, suddenly kneeled on one knee, and took out a velvet box from his pocket. Everyone thought he would say some affectionate confession. But he scratched his head and said with a serious face, "Then, can I owe it to you first, and you can help me pick my bones when I'm old? Now will you marry me first?" This unconventional proposal caught Sienna off guard. She was stunned for a few seconds, then laughed out loud, and kicked him in the butt. Dream on. This girl hasn't had enough fun yet. Though she said no, she still extended her hand. Jasper immediately beamed and put the ring on her finger. Griffin and I watched from the side, smiling at each other. Everything was understood without words. We used the money invested by the Liu Group, plus our own savings, to open a special funeral studio in a quiet corner of the city center. The name is called Crossing. Crossing others and crossing ourselves. Whether it's a corpse shattered in an accident, or scattered white bones that have been forgotten for many years, in our hands, we can piece together their final dignity and rest. This time, we are no longer anyone's appendages, no longer anyone's experimental materials. We are Adeline, we are Sienna. The best embalmers and bone collectors. And the best ourselves. On the opening day of the studio, Griffin handed me a sealed file bag. This is the police's final investigation report on the Julian case. There are some new discoveries inside, and I think you have the right to know. I opened the file bag. Inside was a diary found in Julian's personal safe. I turned to the last page. The date was 3 years ago. Above, there was only a short line of text. Alara still left. I couldn't keep her. My pupils contracted sharply. At the end of the diary, there was a police investigation note attached. After investigation, the Alara mentioned in Julian's diary is not the same person as his assistant Alara. The real Alara passed away 3 years ago due to illness. The current Alara, originally named Lily, is a missing person from 3 years ago. Her family's DNA does not match the tissue samples from Alara's body. We discovered DNA samples of multiple missing persons deep within Julian's laboratory freezer. Holding the report, my hand trembled slightly. So the Alara we knew was not Alara at all. She was just the first experiment that Julian pieced together using the body of an innocent girl, trying to replicate his white moonlight. He didn't love Alara, he loved a phantom that had already died. And what kind of despair did that girl named Lily experience during the long years of being modified and imprisoned? Perhaps death was a true liberation for her. I raised my head and looked at the bright sunlight outside the window. Sienna and I looked at each other, and we both saw relief in each other's eyes. Everything is over. This time, it's a true new beginning.